And that actually brings me to, I would say, the most fun topic of the session is, what are kind of the failures while you're implementing Kubernetes that companies could run into? And I'd love to hear it from you, Hyman. What are kind of the top 3 failures you've seen? And probably make it as specific as you can from your customers without calling out names. But more important, okay, but what was the lesson that you've learned and you would advise the audience to not go into?
Yeah, I'm thinking of a story 2 weeks ago. Someone came to me and said, you're doing Kubernetes now, we're stopping with Kubernetes, we're going for AWS Lambda or something like that. And I actually, in the back of my mind, I had a customer of ours used AWS Lambda, and they switched to containers.
That's serverless, right?
For another reason. So then I asked him, well, why do you stop using Kubernetes? And he said, yeah, the DevOps engineer that implemented it, he left. And then nobody knew what was running where. He was the only person that maintained Kubernetes, and that was it. So one of the things that I see happen, especially in the smaller companies, is a developer, a lead engineer who is really fascinated by Kubernetes, and it's not really business driven, but it's technology driven.
Yeah.
They start implementing Kubernetes, and after a while, they continue with their development work, and they stop implementing new features into Kubernetes, into the stack, or they completely stop maintaining it, and there are security breaches and everything. Or the developer just leaves. And if the developer leaves, you'll have a really big problem, because no one knows what is running where anymore.
So although it's defined as code, as you just explained, that's a good practice. Still, if your hero or your zero the only one who knows it leaves, then you're in trouble. So what would you recommend a company that is facing these challenges, right? If it's a one-man show, what's the kind of then not go into Kubernetes and keep it how it was, or?
Yeah, so our model at PyNative is actually aimed for that. So what we do is when companies only have one DevOps engineer, for example, and they don't have the budget for more, you can sort of hire us to do it for you, or you can, of course, there's other companies that do it too.
Yeah.
But at least make sure that you don't do it with one person. Don't make it a one-man show, because if you do that, then it will fail.
Yeah.
You have to think about more than just regular updates. Also, you have to support your developers. Make sure that the platform is really working for your developers, so it should make them develop faster. It should not be implemented. That might be the second point why Kubernetes fails sometimes. Sometimes people implement Kubernetes just for the sake of the thrill or the challenge.
Yeah, they've been at KubeCon, right? They've heard a lot of cool technology. They've been reading a couple articles, and let's give it a go.
Yeah, I know from 10 years ago, I really wanted to be an architect, and I was an engineer, and I thought, okay, let's make this as complex as possible, and then I can sort of learn architecture. And that's not really the way to do it. So if you use Kubernetes just for the sake of using Kubernetes because it's fun and the technology is really fun, there's a lot of advantages that you will see, but from a business perspective, it should make sense too.
Hey, and in our first part of the webinar, we touched upon a couple business reasons. Would you, and there also, what was it, 20% of the audience is really in an architecture role. Are there some good books, directions, blogs, people they should follow on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on whatever?
That's a good point, actually.
So how do you come to these strong frameworks besides a simple reference architecture? What are kind of the considerations at that level people should take into account?
Yeah, what you can do is so some people say just go to the CNCF website, pick 30 tools, and you'll be done, right?
Yeah, each of every box,
and you'll be a year further away. So there's a lot of material out there, a lot of trainings, Kubernetes trainings that you can do to make sure that you have a good stack. There's a lot of content. We have some content on the PyNative website. I regularly share some content on my LinkedIn on best practices. So you can follow some people that work with Kubernetes actually in production. That is something you can use to copy them or to sort of implement the same sort of architectures. And yeah, that really helps.
Yeah. Yeah, one other, it's slightly related with the CNCF. There are also a lot of Kubernetes communities, so around, for example, OpenTelemetry, where we really speak about observability in general and how to standardize these type of practices. And it happens, I'm not I'm less familiar with the other areas, but it happens in every area. So if you really want to go deeper, there are hundreds of these communities that you can join, a lot of Discord groups that you can join where the learning just accelerates it. Hey, and one other argument why it fails, I've sometimes heard that it's too expensive. And then people decide to move back more the traditional monolith, whatever type of way. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? I'm conscious of time.
I'll try to make it as quick as possible. I think what you see a lot is that people spin up Kubernetes clusters. They don't look at their resources. They implement their applications like it's a monolith, and they put it in Kubernetes, and then they scale it up to 10 replicas, and then everything is big, and it costs a lot of money. But in order to cut down on cost, you can really think about auto-scaling, for example, in Kubernetes, or you can think about using spot nodes. There are so many ways when you start using Kubernetes to make sure you can sort of cut the costs down of your AWS bill. We have an example where we cut the cost by 70% for a client running Kubernetes without any business interference or any differences in their application stack. So if you really think about your Kubernetes cluster and sometimes migrate clusters together or bring them together, because it might not always be necessary to have 10 different clusters for 10 different environments, for example. That can really cut down cost.
And what we see at some of our customers, there are a couple stages, right? So the first is really, okay, there's just a lot of idle stuff, right, which you no longer need, right? So that's the easiest, the quickest win. And then you go quickly into what you just mentioned, you're over-provisioning a lot of stuff, so why not bring it together? And then you run into the more complex stuff, right, where you need to work on your architecture to do horizontal scalability and these type of things. A tool to use, or framework, I would say, is KubeCost. You're familiar with that as well, Hyman, but really worth looking into. They also give some recommendations on where to find optimization. So that would be something to look into. Cost is certainly a topic to pay attention. Hey, there's just one final question, or there are a couple questions, but one coming in from the audience is, my company has started with a platform team. Out of the 6 elements you've mentioned before, what is the first one we should really focus on the most? Let's keep that as a closing question. It's a good question.
That's a good question. So out of the spider web, I think. He means,
the spider web indeed.
He or she means. I think actually it depends. So if you have a lot of time, then focus on your infrastructure as code layer. Make it really well. Start with that. Set up your Kubernetes cluster entirely and then run your applications on top of it. But usually it doesn't go that way. So there's experimenting first, etc., etc. So if you run a development cluster or only want to, if you first start with development, it's best to just click a cluster together and make developers sort of experiment with the cluster. And in the meantime, while they are developing, set up a robust cluster of course you would start with infrastructure as code. So setting up all your infrastructure correctly. Make sure that the security and authentication is really well. And whenever your application is going into production or before it's going into production, make sure your observability stack is
in place as well.
In place.
So you start with the development side of the house, click something together and start making your application work. And then in the meantime, think about infrastructure as code, how to set it up properly with load balancing, etc., while taking the security and authentications into account. And then ultimately, just before you go live, certainly think about observability. And I would say, think also about stack state, because we are, as said, in the midst of observability.